my friends, surprise, I am here. I said I wasn't going to be, but I couldn't resist the opportunity to reach out to my friend Glenn Kirschner and have him explain some of the breaking news that we woke up to today on Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, a special Thursday program I said wouldn't happen with Justice Matters Glenn Kirschner, former federal prosecutor. Really excited to have him here. Hope to see you tonight at the Hangout. It is Thursday after all, so I couldn't resist but to post this conversation. I had some real questions about what was happening at the Michigan Supreme Court, and then I saw this last-minute filing from Jack Smith that Glenn Kirschner actually hadn't even gotten read into yet because it broke just before we started talking, and he was wrapping up a video for his YouTube channel, which you should go subscribe to. Justice Matters, everybody. Subscribe to him and support him on Patreon. Follow him on all social media, and now listen to the Justice Matters podcast. You know Glenn Kirschner, you love him. I've got the Kirschner Report for you here on a Thursday at the end of December 2023. I hope you're enjoying your Taint week. I hope you're doing nothing and getting nothing done. I tried not to, but I couldn't help myself. So here's Glenn Kirschner, and I'll be hosting you tonight at our Hangout if you're a subscriber. If you're not, what are you waiting for? Sign up now. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. If you don't show up at our Hangouts, maybe tonight is your night. It's a New Year's Hangout. We'll wrap up 23, look forward to 24, and have a fun time as always. But right now, let's learn a little bit with Glenn Kirschner. There he is, joining me right here on Taint Week. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Taint Week, but that's the name of it. Between Christmas and New Year's, this week doesn't have a name. I call it Taint Week because it's between two things. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a heartwarming holiday moniker you've given it. Taint Week. That's lovely, Pete.
Well, I mean, I don't know. You're always working. You did take some time off, but it seemed like you were working. What do you think should happen between Christmas and New Year's? The point is nothing should happen and people shouldn't feel guilty. No one should get back to anybody. Nothing happens. Nobody does anything.
Pete, justice, like rust, never sleeps.
You are right about that, which is really intimidating, actually, the way you said that. It made me feel like you don't sleep. It seems like, by the way, Jack Smith isn't sleeping. I don't know. I know you didn't get to this yet because you've already been responding to another headline about the Michigan Supreme Court. But apparently, Jack Smith has filed a new file with the D.C. Circuit Court asking the judge there, Judge Chutkan, to block Donald Trump from making partisan political attacks during the trial. And it's just breaking now. I know you're not read in, but the motion filed today in the U.S. District Court is seeking to limit what statements Trump can make leading up to his scheduled March 4th, and we'll see if it's that date, federal trial on alleged 2020 election interference. What is this process? Why is he filing this?
So let me ask you to read me in a little bit more. Is this like from the gag order? He doesn't want Trump to be able to say stuff in the run up to the trial, or he doesn't want Trump to be able to say things to the jury about this being a political prosecution? Because those are two different motions.
That's a great question. Includes a request to prevent Trump from telling the jury he is being prosecuted by the DOJ in coordination with President Biden, as well as suggestions by Trump that undercover agents fomented violence at the Capitol riots and foreign influence in the 2020 election through public statements, filings, and arguments in hearings before the court. This is the quote. The defense has attempted to inject into this case partisan political attacks and irrelevant and prejudicial issues that have no place in a jury trial, is what Jack Smith's team has asked or told the U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan, who you know well.
Got it. Thank you, Pete. So what this is, it's what's called a motion in limine. What we do, and these motions are actually fairly routine because there are ground rules for a criminal trial. Litigants, defendants can't argue irrelevant stuff, inflammatory stuff, prejudicial stuff, particularly if it's not based on fact and if it's not relevant to the issues that have to be decided by the jury. So all of this nonsense about this is a political persecution, it's election interference, it's Joe Biden putting his thug, Jack Smith, up to prosecuting me. He can say that nonsense in the public square. He can spew it out into the court of public opinion. But if you file a motion in limine, trying to limit the arguments that Trump and his lawyers can make to the trial jury or during jury selection, We do that all the time because you can't make improper inflammatory arguments that are designed to appeal to the politics, the ideology, the prejudices of any juror. That is out of bounds, and we litigate this kind of stuff fairly routinely. And I have a feeling Judge Chutkan will say, yeah, this is not about politics. We're going to have 70 or 80 Republican witnesses paraded before the jury implicating Donald Trump in crime. And this is not about the Democrats. It's not about election interference. It's what Donald Trump did and the evidence that will persuade a jury he's guilty of the charged offenses.
I mean, it's really an interesting filing. You say it's routine, but what I'm hearing, and let me defend Trump and his legal team, is you can't argue, you can't make the arguments that we know you're going to make to defend your client. Your client can't make these arguments in his own defense. Who gets to decide what arguments I can make in my own defense?
The judge rules on what is relevant, admissible evidence and argument and what's not. We can't appeal to the prejudices, the politics, and the ideology of jurors. That's not what a criminal trial is about. When I say motions in limine are routine, Pete, we file them in virtually every case. No, they're usually not involving these kind of hot button issues like an attempt to overturn a presidential election. But we always have to file legal pleadings and legal motions to sort of set the landscape, what it is we're allowed to argue, what evidence we're allowed to present, and what evidence the prosecutors are not allowed to present, and we're not allowed to argue. Same goes for the defense. So this is a judge's job, is to make sure every argument is lawful, is keeping within the rules of evidence, and is not designed to appeal to any prejudices or politics or ideology of any juror.
Well, this is a real interesting filing, and I'm super excited to see once you've read into it what your reaction will be. I'm sure you'll be talking about that just about everywhere. But while we're on this case and talking about Jack Smith, I guess let's just ask the question I was planning to ask you before this news broke, right before we started talking, which is that this case is currently on hold and is going to be considered by the Supreme Court whether or not the president himself has immunity from having this case even be heard, because he is arguing that as the president, he cannot be held responsible for committing a crime. I think you think that's a ridiculous, everybody does, argument to make, but yet the Supreme Court is planning to hear this on January 9th, no?
No, the Supreme Court shouldn't hear this, and there is no indication that the Supreme Court will hear this. You know, the Supreme Court only accepts review of about 5 to 10% of the cases where litigants are asking the Supreme Court, please take my case, please review my conviction or my issue. So think about this, Pete, 60 or 65 challenges to the 2020 presidential election results by Donald Trump's cruddy lawyers, half of whom are disbarred or pending disbarment. Yeah. Some of them are his RICO co-defendants at this point, right? How many of those cases did the Supreme Court accept for review? Zero, goose egg, nada. Why? Because there was no constitutional issue to be resolved by the Supreme Court. Pete, if people take nothing else away from our talk today, there's no such thing as absolute presidential immunity against prosecution, any more than there's Santa Claus immunity or magical unicorn immunity. The Supreme Court should not accept review of this issue. And it hasn't thus far. In fact, Jack Smith has only asked them to do it once, and he asked that they do it on an accelerated track. They said, no, we're not taking it on an accelerated track or otherwise. They could have said, oh, we'll take it for review on our own timetable. They didn't say that. Here's the thing, Pete. Yeah. Judge Chutkan ruled there's no such thing as absolute presidential immunity. Why? Because there is no federal law, no statute. There is no case law, no precedent from an appellate court, including the Supreme Court, and there's no constitutional provision setting out that presidential immunity against prosecution is a thing. If it was a thing and the Supreme Court rules it's a thing, President Biden can commit all the crimes he wants to retain power, right? He wouldn't, but he could. So the fact that Judge Chutkan shot it down definitively and it got appealed to the D.C. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, the Court of Appeals is not like the Supreme Court. The Court of Appeals can't say, this is bogus. We're not going to take this for review. They don't have the option of not accepting a case for review. Only the Supreme Court does. So they will resolve it. The argument, I'll be in court for the argument on January 9. They will resolve it promptly. They will conclude, I believe, unanimously. There is no presidential immunity against prosecution. And then the Supreme Court should say everything is done. We're not going to accept review of this issue any more than we accepted review of the election challenge cases. I don't know if that's what's going to happen. The Supreme Court might want to flex. I don't know what Harlan Crow is telling, Justice Thomas to do. We don't know, right? Maybe they will accept review, but if they do, they will accept review and I believe promptly say, just like all of the other judges below us said, no such thing as absolute presidential immunity. Because if there is, the first thing a president could do is criminally disband the Supreme Court.
Yeah. And you make a great argument in one of your recent YouTube videos as why they will decide the way they're decided, but the Supreme Court, because they want to preserve themselves over the president, the executive branch. And so it's not the most moral sounding argument, but that's why you conclude they will decide that the president doesn't have immunity. And just to clear up, that's where I was confused. Jack Smith said, I'm going to just appeal this right at the Supreme Court because that's where it's going anyway. But it's actually at the appellate court. You're saying it's likely they will decide and it'll never get to the Supreme Court. But Jack Smith thought it might, and he wanted to speed things up.
Exactly. Jack Smith was going with a legal belt and suspenders. He was saying, listen, it's in the appellate court right now, so please expedite it. And the appellate court said, you got it. And he said, and by the way, Supremes, if you're going to take it up, you might as well take it up now because there is a legal vehicle to have the Supreme Court leapfrog it over the appeals court and take it up directly. And the Supreme Court said no.
Okay, so anything else about that trial? I guess just want to ask you about what you think of the likelihood of the March 4th trial day. We're all now asking you and every other legal expert, and we should, if we're talking about this, recording it and wanting people to learn anything from it, keep track of the trial dates and the primary dates. Like you have to keep that in mind as to just be able to understand what's happening comprehensively in the world. I'm not sure how much judges are thinking about that or should be thinking about that when they set their dates. But what's the update on the March 4th start date for the federal trial of Donald Trump by Jack Smith, the big one?
Yeah, this is anybody's guess. There is no way to definitively predict this. I do think with the appellate litigation, there is now a chance that the March 4 trial date slips a little bit, maybe into April or even May. Not necessarily because, as I say, it's going to be argued on January 9. It could be resolved 1 week later. That is still a couple of months in advance of the March trial date. So the trial date could stick, but it might not. If the Supreme Court decides to take it up after the appellate court resolves it, then I think it's almost certain that the March trial date will slide until April, May, June. I think we can still get it in well in advance of the November 2024 election.
Yeah, right. But March 5th is Super Tuesday, where the primary elections, there's the greatest number of states holding their primary elections. Of course, that's March 5th, though. So that wouldn't be a date to be keep as much in mind as maybe the Republican National Convention. Where will the Trump's legal issues be if he's the nominee and the convention is being held? Because at the convention, they could actually nominate somebody else. I don't know. Yeah. I think that's an interesting date to keep in mind.
Nikki Haley seems to be coming on strong. I'm not saying I'm pulling for her, but, there would be this sort of sweet justice in all of a sudden another Republican candidate surging and just overtaking Donald Trump. Yeah. And then really it will have nothing to do with, prosecutions or civil cases being brought against him or states disqualifying him from the ballot. It will just be about him losing in the primary to a better candidate. Frankly, anybody, including a dead geranium, is a better candidate than Donald Trump.
Really, really strong point. Very perfect political execution analysis on that for sure. Let's get back to the legal, which is the headlines that we woke up to here on Taint Week. I guess I didn't think there was going to be that many headlines on Taint Week, but Michigan has decided their Supreme Court that Donald Trump can remain on the ballot. Michigan Supreme Court decides Trump can stay on ballot is the headline everywhere, basically. Michigan Supreme Court rejects insurrectionist ban case, keeps Trump on the 2024 ballot. Of course, Colorado kicked him off. We know this is going to the Supreme Court. We know they're going to be hypocrites and decide that he can stay on the ballot. And some people think that that's important just because politically you don't want the courts to decide this. But rather than the political analysis, what do you think of this decision from Michigan Supreme Court today?
Yeah, at first blush, it's pretty upsetting, but you got to stick with me here because there is a legal doctrine known as the doctrine of ripeness. Legal issues like fruit are not going to be consumed until they're ripe. You don't eat fruit until it's ripe. You don't decide a legal issue until it's ripe. That is literally a legal doctrine. So judges refuse to take up issues all the time if they're not yet ripe. This one was not yet ripe. Why do I say that? Not all state election laws and procedures are created equal. Some are drafted well, some are drafted less well. Colorado drafted pretty well, and we got a decision out of the Colorado Supreme Court saying Donald Trump is disqualified from being on the primary ballot. In Michigan, the laws are different. In Michigan, the Secretary of State has no authority to keep an insurrectionist off the ballot and has no authority to keep a 12-year-old off the ballot and has no authority to keep somebody who's not a natural-born U.S. citizen off the ballot. The laws and regulations in Michigan, the election laws, say if the Republican Party or the Democrats want to put somebody's name on the ballot, the Secretary of State cannot say no, even if it's an insurrectionist, even if it's somebody who's not 35 years old, right? That's why I say a 12-year-old. A 12-year-old is disqualified under the Constitution, but Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State in Michigan, has no lawful authority to keep those names off, even if the people would be disqualified from holding office. So the Supreme Court in Michigan said this issue is not one we're going to take up. But the litigants in the case said, that's fine. Put him on the Republican primary ballot. If he wins the primary, we will rebring this challenge because he shouldn't be permitted on the general ballot. So that is the state of affairs right now in Michigan. This ain't over in the courts of Michigan. It's just that this one battle wasn't ripe to be fought yet. And the courts will have to take it up again in the future if Trump is the Republican nominee.
Very enlightening and interesting. We'll see what happens. But, I would have asked you, regardless of Michigan's Supreme Court's decision to work on Taint Week, about Colorado's Supreme Court's decision and what you make of their decision. And obviously, it's going to the Supreme Court and what you, as I think a lot of other people anticipate, will be their decision.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Just as confident as I am, Pete, that the United States Supreme Court will not say a president is king, is above the law, and is beyond the reach of the Supreme Court, which he would be if they granted him absolute immunity against all prosecutions. I'm not so confident that the Supreme Court will say he should be disqualified from ballots. I believe he should be, just as if he were 34 years old or not a natural-born citizen, because the Constitution says somebody who swore an oath to the Constitution and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion is disqualified, period. And it's only a question of how you implement that. I think the Supreme Court can find any way it likes to navigate its way around that issue and decline to keep him off the ballot. That would be my sense right now, because I don't have any faith in the Supreme Court.
Right.
So that would be my guess, is that one will fall the wrong way.
And as we wrap up, do you have anything you want to say about Rudy Giuliani's case and the outcomes there?
Yeah, he should be detained pending trial. Why do I say that? He's a RICO defendant. Condition 5, which I'm going to read it because I have it right in front of me, Pete. I didn't know you were going to ask me. This is condition number 5 of Rudy Giuliani's release conditions in Georgia, where he is pending trial as a RICO defendant and criminal co-conspirator of Donald Trump and others. Number 5, the defendant Giuliani shall perform no act to intimidate any person known to him to be a witness in this case or otherwise obstruct the administration of justice. He stood on the dang courthouse steps. Yeah. I was in court for some of his closing arguments in Rudy's defamation case. And he lied about, defamed, and put in danger those 2 women again and their witnesses in the Georgia case. He should be revoked on release and detained pending trial. He should also be made to pay every penny he's got to Shamos and Ruby Freeman.
Yeah, likely he that won't come to fruition, right?
Well, he's filed for bankruptcy, which doesn't discharge your money judgments that have been won against you in civil suits. But everybody's going to get their little piece of the pie. Who wants to touch any Rudy Giuliani pie? Everybody's going to get a little piece of the Rudy money, whatever's left when he is forced to sell off everything.
Just a drawer full of very expensive cufflinks that have his paws on them. What do you think about New Year's resolutions? Are they bullshit?
Yeah, I can't say I make them. I mean, I'm always determined to, work out more and eat better. And sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. But yeah, I'm not a big New Year's resolution guy.
So for those who are really going to make these, you think, don't waste your time. Let's go.
Hey, if it works for you, do it. Whatever works for you.
Oh, wow. You're not as judgmental as I am. As always, minded, because justice matters. Glenn Kirschner, I appreciate you joining me and explaining all this as always. Thank you so much.
Great talking to you, Pete.
There you go. Glenn Kirschner. Everybody go listen to his podcast. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. Let him know that you heard him here on this show. And thank you very much for supporting this program with your paid subscription. And I hope to see you tonight. Those of you who are paid subscribers, you should be getting a link for today's hangout, tonight's hangout. And I hope to see you at 8 Eastern and out in Vegas in March 22nd and 23rd when we're all going to be having a very special stand-up community gathering. Looking forward to that. And I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up if I don't see you tonight.
When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. And you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of see them flee the scene of that experiment. If you stand up, alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.